So this is what I hope is going to be the very first episode, which is got this great complicated sound setup, if you can see it. It's going to be the special Halloween episode because Halloween is awesome. We're doing The Halloween Tree from 1993, directed by Mario Puzo, who has done almost nothing. Like the New Kids on the Block show. So just keep that in mind. I could not find any accolades for this man. And then Stand By Me, directed by Rob Reiner in 1986. Both are based on a short story or a short novel. The Halloween Tree is based on The Halloween Tree from 1972. Stand By Me is based on the short story The Body by Stephen King. I should say Halloween Tree is by Ray Bradbury, and he wrote it in 1972. And then Stand By Me is based on The Body, which is from 1982, and the collection Different Seasons, which I think all of Different Seasons has been made into a movie at this point, which is really impressive.
As it should. That's a great short story collection.
I think it's only 2 that have and 2 that haven't.
No, Apt Pupil has. Yep. And isn't the one Shawshank's been done.
Yeah. But isn't there a short story about the doctor who eats himself?
I was just reading an article after I watched the movie. It was like 2 have not been made. So.
I thought that's what Apt Pupil is from.
Brendan.
That was a creepy one.
Not Brendan Fraser?
No, that's a different movie about Nazis.
Bringing it back to the Nazis.
Always.
Happy Halloween.
Happy Halloween. It's Nazi season.
So I'm going to ask you to each introduce yourself. We'll start counterclockwise. So we'll start with Raz and then we'll go do.
Would you like me to say,
who you are, what you want people to know about you?
Would you like me to say,
who you are, what you want people to know about you?
What's your favorite animated movie?
Yes.
Well, we're going to get to that.
Oh, okay, sorry.
I was meant to say my phrase. My name is Raz Cunningham, and I am a filmmaker and content creator.
My name is Aidan Laliberte. I am an actor, writer, and filmmaker. Beat you. No, I'm kidding. And I love Stephen King a lot.
My name is Rekha Rosha, and I'm an educator. I also work for a micro nonprofit called Frequency Writers. I serve on the board for that, and occasionally teach some classes. I've also, in my spare time, do a lot of gardening. That seems relevant. I don't know.
You do a lot of gardening. You're impressive. I'm Mel Rainsberger. I am one of 4, like the Borg. So I'm going to ask you what your latest animated... Well, yeah, I'll ask some questions and we'll get into the topic. What is the latest animated film or show you've seen? Shows are much bigger nowadays, so I figure I'll include that. You don't have to go in order.
No. Go ahead.
Oh, come on. I'd try. Yeah, without missing a beat. The most recent animated, let's see. No, I don't want to count that. I want to talk. There's a movie that I saw recently. What the heck?
Somebody else can go.
Yeah, I'm going to try to think of it because I cannot think of it.
I think because there's a lot that we all watch on Facebook, YouTube, wherever, and it's hard to differentiate. It's just kind of a pretty steady stream.
Yeah,
that's my theory.
Was it Kyrgyzstan?
Most recently, I swear I think this is true, was that Pixar movie about the girl with all the emotions.
Oh wait, that's the one I saw recently, Inside Out.
Oh, that's it.
That's what it was.
Inside Out. All right.
That's the most recent one.
I was touched by that. That was very sweet. And before that probably was another Pixar. It was probably Minions 2. I love the Minions. Whatever, I don't care that much.
You like the Minions?
I do. Here's one. What I like about it is they capture the id energy of any young, person or creature, that sort of impulse towards destruction, but in the sweetest way. It's just energy kind of bursting outward, and it's not looking for an end. It's not seeking an end. So it can be destructive or constructive. It's just energy exploding outwards, and I think that's adorable. And the Gru figure in the Minions, the Steve Carell character, I thought he was fun enough. They could have done more, to develop why he is exactly the way he is, but I thought it was satisfying. Not as smart as Inside Out, though.
But you, Razzical.
I think, actually, the last animated film that I saw was Moana.
Ooh.
Which...
Going back.
Yeah, well, again, we watched it again.
Oh, I thought it had to be something we hadn't seen.
No,
like, for
it's
the
just the
first
latest
time.
one you've watched. You
yeah.
could have watched it 50 million times.
Chronologically.
Oh, okay. Well, I already messed up. Yeah, Moana, because we watched that together.
So it was
Second
Moana,
time.
and then last night I ended up watching. I finished the second season of Big Mouth on Netflix, and then I also watched an anime on Netflix called Lost Song, which is really interesting. Which is about like. The first couple episodes were a little scattered, but then it got much better when it was like, oh, this is what the show's about. Anyway, songs have magical properties, and if you sing them the right way, they do magical things. But the problem I had with it was, in this very Japanese, like almost like they've moved on from this, but no one told the studio. There would be characters who would say the same things every episode, like that's impossible. That's scientifically impossible.
Like a catchphrases.
Yeah, exactly. And they just spent like 3 episodes stating the rules over and over again. Whereas like just before this, I finished all of the Dragon Prince on Netflix, which is really good. And they state the rules like maybe you kind of figure it out as you see it. You're not being told what the rules are, you're being shown, and I like that.
I watched all of Hilda last week, and that was amazing. Loved Hilda. Hilda's like
Oh, I saw the ads for that.
Adventure Time plus Over the Garden Wall. It's really weird.
Not sure what's that.
You've never seen that with Elijah Wood? It's like a 10-episode like mini-series that Cartoon Network did.
Yep.
It's like this boy dressed kind of like a gnome, Elijah Wood's character, and his brother are like trying to get back home, and it's all these like weird lands they go to, so they like meet a village made of like people that are pumpkins. And it's all very surreal. It's got Christopher Lloyd in it. It came out a couple years ago. It's so dark and sad, but it's really good.
Yeah, I think Inside Out was, what I liked about it is that it uses animation to do something that is otherwise hard, right?
To explain.
Right. You couldn't use conventional film to really talk about the emotional production inside a preteen girl.
Right. Yeah.
And if you did, that would be fucking weird, right? Like, that's a little invasive. That poor kid. Yeah. That would be, not right. So, that was part of the draw, I think, of that movie. And, that each of those emotions are both at odds with each other, but also working in tandem.
It was cool, too, because it was a comment on, like, the stigma of not just, like, mental illness, but of being sad. Like,
Right.
I was so glad that it made the point to be, like, being sad is good. Let yourself feel these things. Like, it's not... Yeah, I thought that was awesome. And the moment where Joy realizes, like, the purpose of sadness, because the whole time she just shortchanges sadness the whole time, and you're like, oh my god, when is she gonna but as the audience the whole time you're like, yeah, what is the point of sadness?
Right, I think there's something. I worked with a guy once who wrote a book called Against Happiness, and he got savaged in the New York Times book review by Garrison Keillor, of all people. It was the weirdest book review. It was like a really super bitchy Garrison Keillor being just like, fuck this guy and his anti-happiness. But what the guy was trying to get at is that to pursue happiness as the end goal of every fucking thing in your life is abysmal.
Yeah, it is.
That what happiness is, and what kind of you have to make space for happiness rather than just like crush out every other feeling you have so that happiness is the last man standing on the field.
Right, it's not a destination. It's
right.
It's the way you go to the destination is what happiness should be. It's very, very
So I think there's something you could say kind of anti-American about that film that I really like.
Yeah.
I will say I thought it was very interesting that they had like happy and sadness were the two very distinct emotions, but then it was fear, anger, and disgust. Yeah. Disgust was an interesting emotion to choose.
Yeah.
And when happiness and sadness were, joy and sadness were out and stuck. They were away from central processing or whatever it was. I forget what it was called.
I kind of forget the story.
Fear, anger, and disgust started making illogical decisions because there was no proper balance. But like the decision to run away, that was anger. That wasn't like sadness wouldn't choose to run away. Sadness would just wallow. Yeah. And so would happiness because they're very stationary. But these transitional feelings, anger, fear, and disgust, they can't react. They need everything else to kind of function, which I thought was very interesting.
None of them operate kind of in a vacuum. I thought that was pretty smart.
What is the first animated film you remember seeing? It doesn't have to be like the one that came out like when you were 3, but it's the one you remember.
I remember very vividly. It was Sleeping Beauty, and I thought, especially as someone who's colorblind, the fight over the three Flora, Fauna, and Merryweather fighting over the colors
So good.
was not only excellently well done, but I kind of felt like that's how my brain interprets color. It's pink. No, it's green. No, it's blue.
All of you are wrong.
That's funny. For me, I think the first animated film I remember seeing was Tarzan. It was actually the first movie I saw in the theaters too, because when it came out, I was 4. I think I just turned 4. Because it was 99, I think that movie came out. Yeah, and it was, or no, I was 3. I think I was 3. I don't know. That doesn't matter. But yeah, it was. I remember the theater was too loud actually, because like I had like weird auditory like sensitivities when I was little. But like, yeah, but it was. I think specifically like my parents were like, oh yeah, they actually apologized to the people because the sound was too loud or something. But yeah, I think it was Tarzan, which kind of like is lame because it was like, to me, not one of the better Disney Renaissance movies. So it's like, of course, of all of them, I saw Tarzan first, but then kind of worked backwards from there.
As the resident old person, I remember Snow White, and I was friggin' terrified. I think my mom had to take me out of the movie theater because I was so scared. But I do remember that. And the other movie that I remember also being traumatized by was Bambi. As soon as the mother gets shot, I swear to God, I can't remember. I was so traumatized, I can't remember the rest of the film. But in terms of movies that I actually made it through, the ones that I really stuck with me were like, the one with the mouse. Oh, The Rescuers. I loved that one. I could get through the whole thing. It wasn't too scary. It was actually pretty funny. And there were mice in it, and you know, they were really cute. Animated movies, if you count claymation, were the Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer and the Heat Miser and his brother.
The Year Without a Santa Claus.
The Year Without a Santa Claus. Those really stuck with me. In terms of like animated shows that kind of helped make me who I am, Scooby-Doo. Very important to my formation. Every day after school, I'd run home and I'd jump from like the edge of our sunken living room onto the zebra couch and watch it. And I had a Scooby-Doo lunchbox, and that is why I'm still into like, you know, like mysteries and like, you know, and it had such a cool little like rebel kind of edge to it, because every episode was like the old man being like, I would have gotten away with it if it wasn't for you hippie kids, you know, and I kind of love that. And then, you know, even in my 20s, by then it was The Simpsons, and I fucking still love that show. It's so culturally important for so
You're
many
also, let me just add to everybody, you're not old enough to have seen Snow White on its first run in the theaters.
I think I was.
No, it came out in the 30s. You are not that old.
1939. I think.
Yeah, I'm just saying you're not that old.
Or 37.
A couple of years later.
You age really well if that's the case.
1921.
Remember how we said Nazis make the world go round? I'll just leave you with that thought. But
Hitler was in full swing.
it's the secret sauce and everything. But yeah, there's, you know, animation has had animated stories like huge impact, I think, on anyone in my age group, because you had Saturday morning cartoons that ran for 8 hours, and I think I watched every hour every Saturday for my entire, you know, like it's a huge chunk of my life. So
I miss Saturday morning cartoons. So I'm going to sum up these two, and you know, you can correct me or jump in if I'm getting just a little summary wrong. But The Halloween Tree by Ray Bradbury actually stars narration by Ray Bradbury, which is awesome. Coughing. And then the main, like, I guess, villain, Monshroud, is played by Leonard Nimoy. So I don't know how that casting happened, but I love it. It's about 4 children that learn their friend has appendicitis, and he goes to the hospital, and they meet this guy, Monshroud, who is kind of deaf. Clavicle carapace? I wrote it down somewhere, but he's got a crazy name. And he's basically like, if you help me find... Well, okay, so he's this big tree of pumpkins, and they all sort of stand in for people's souls, and their friend takes his, what they call pumpkin fire soul, and he steals it back so that he gets to stay alive. And Monshroud is like, if you help me, like, find your friend, you'll get your friend back. And at the end of it all works out because it's a kid's piece of property, piece of media, but they... they go through 4 different sort of like death rituals and explore those, how other cultures either worshipped, celebrated, or understood how death worked. Mummies, witches, kind of druids, gargoyles, and Day of the Dead are the 4 they cover in that. It's a made-for-TV movie. Hanna-Barbera. I bet this was like some sort of test pilot to see if they could make Cartoon Network as a thing and produce their own like on TV cinema. And then there's Stand By Me by Rob Reiner, 1986. 4 boys find out that there's a dead body in the woods. It's pretty far away, and they decide they're going to go find this dead body and like report that they found it, and then get all these like accolades because they were like the kids that found this missing boy that's dead. And it has a whole ton of famous people in it. Will Wheaton, Jerry O'Connell, River Phoenix, Corey Feldman?
Yep.
Because Haim is the other one. Kiefer Sutherland. John Cusack's in it.
Yeah, for a hot minute.
It's like every 80s child except Corey Haim.
And then what's his name? Who's the older Will Wheaton? The guy from Close Encounters.
Jerry O'Connell.
Oh, no, I know who you're talking about.
Richard Dreyfuss.
Yes.
Richard Dreyfuss,
I was
yeah.
about to-
Richard Dreyfuss.
His name keeps coming up recently. Like, this is crazy. I don't
And
know.
I realize that's why I think he's the writer. I think he's the narrator in The Sandlot, is because he is in Stand By Me. And, like, for years, I thought it was like he'd played both, but he doesn't.
Daniel Stern.
No, it's Daniel Stern, or at least visually, it's not Daniel Stern.
Oh, I thought Daniel Stern was the narrator in
Wonder Years.
That's Wonder Years. Yeah, you're right.
But it's somebody that I didn't really recognize in The Sandlot because I recently rewatched that too. But yeah, that's why I always think it's Richard Dreyfuss, because he's the one from Stand By Me.
I like to play a little game after seeing Stand By Me, which is now, I think, Richard, like, that, obviously, there's Richard Dreyfuss's career, like, as a kid, like, his childhood in Stand By Me, and then his career as a writer, and I like to think that in between these is Jaws, so it's one continuous timeline throughout.
Like he thought he was going to be a marine biologist.
Right. And then he was like, screw that. I'm going to be a writer.
Yep.
Yeah, he's had a really traumatic childhood.
Like he writes Jaws or something and then goes on to write other things.
That would be awesome, actually. So that's the 2 movies. I have a couple questions written down. Trying to think, I should do one of the softball ones first. And then, because I have one that's really good that I want to, like, be in there.
Just petting the cat.
Huh?
Just petting the
I
cat.
know, it's like I'm a supervillain.
What the listeners cannot hear is that Melinda is doing her best Dr. Evil Blofeld impression right now. She's wearing black, petting a black cat on her lap.
Yeah. I don't have my star earrings on, so I'm not totally evil. Sorry, I'm looking. I'll start with this one. This one's in either movie. What surprised you, like, about them, either the storytelling of the characters or the actions?
I guess I'll just go first. I mean, simple. I was surprised in Halloween Tree. That's the title, right? Yeah, Halloween Tree. I kept calling it Pumpkin Tree the other day. And I was like, that's basically what it is. But so I was surprised that he actually took a year off all their lives.
Yeah, he accepted
He
the deal?
actually, yeah, I thought he was gonna like do the whole kids movie thing where it's
Right.
like I was actually kind of like,
Because he starts out like, a year at the burned end of your candle? Like, what the hell do I want that for? And he's like,
is his life worth it? And the kid's like, yeah, take our years. And then he was like, all right. And I was like, okay.
It's also not clear if, like, if Pip, who's the kid that has run away, or is the ghost they're trying to save, if he only gets 4 more years of their lives.
No,
I actually wrote down my notes. What is the trade-in value on a child's year? Is it got like a...
Yeah, like,
it converts
what's the
to so many adult
exchange
years?
rate? Like, what's that?
Admittedly,
What does that look like?
Mountroud's motivations and plans are not very clear in this movie, but we'll get into that.
Yeah, he was very.
Anything in Stand By Me that's...
well, I want to say the other thing about Halloween Tree is I was surprised at how serious these kids were about their friendship because,
from the beginning,
they're it's so the best
person in the world.
I mean, Ray Bradbury starts it off. He's got this a little bit of like overselling of this kid, like all those soda pop bottles of shut the fuck up, you know, like. But each kid is like, you're the only person who never laughed at my glasses, and I want to thank you. I'm like, these kids are like, they're growing up in this moment, where they're putting value on something for themselves.
Yeah.
And I thought that was kind of it had a surprising amount of gravitas for a stupid kind of like it's a kind of stupid premise, but there was a seriousness there that I thought it made it work. It made it.
Yeah, not for a moment did those kids ever go like, should we be going to different worlds and endangering our lives for this ginger kid? Like, no.
Did we go that so much? Yeah.
Because I feel like at that, like my group of friends, maybe we're terrible people, would have been like, what's happening? All right, well, he did it to himself.
I can make other friends.
You don't see, like, all of a sudden they're just like, take years off our lives. I'm like, whoa, let's evaluate. I'd be the one kid who'd be like, let's talk about this.
So, Pip, is that your Christian name?
Pipkin. His full name was Pipkin.
Yeah.
Pipkin.
Pipkin.
That's just Ray Bradbury
Ralph,
going like, I don't
Wally,
care anymore.
No, and Tom.
Yeah.
And I kept calling Tom Jack in my notes because he clearly should just be Jack Skeleton.
Yeah.
Like,
Oh, yeah.
I think that was actually the same year that Nightmare Before Christmas came out.
I was wondering that actually. There's something about it,
really
yeah. But the animation is so old timey. It feels like it was made, but it feels like it was made in the 70s.
It does. I think that they just didn't have the budget.
I think they didn't release it or distribute it until the 90s or something.
I don't know, because before we were talking about when the beginning of the movie and at the end, like some sequences in the like shots of the neighborhood and everything were beautiful. I thought.
Yeah.
The artwork, some shots in the beginning and the end, like when the kids are traversing the suburbs and like the streets. Some of those, and the end shot is beautiful. Like those felt like more, I guess, fitting of the time it came out, but there were some sequences where I'm like, this looks a little weirdly old. I don't know, because especially 1993, that's the year like Lion King came out the next year, and that's drastically different animation, like the look of it. But I think it's just a budget thing. I don't know.
Was there anything in Stand By Me that stood out as surprising? Have you all seen this movie before?
Oh, I saw it before.
Yeah.
This was my first time watching it. I know. I also missed The Goonies, by the way, growing up. Because
Did you grow up in China?
No, let me explain. My parents, who thankfully did not
USSR?
No.
Cuba.
No.
Okay.
No. My parents, who thankfully did not believe in the rating system, and I have them to credit for my interest in film. My father would just dictate what the family would watch. So there was a lot of like Alien and Fatal Attraction.
I saw Fatal Attraction very.
Yeah, I'm like, Glenn Close is naked. This could change things for me. Feel like this is okay. She's a handsome man. Yeah, so it was more like adult fare. But whenever I got a chance, which is why they let me watch The Simpsons so readily. Which also, thank you for shaping me, Matt Groening. But yeah, I missed a lot of like Monster Squad. I missed all the big '80s ones.
So what surprised you? Because you're the first time watcher.
Great. Okay. Sorry. So I was talking to Aidan about this morning because he asked me what I thought, and I prefaced it by saying, had I seen this when I was the right age to see this, I easily know what my reaction would be. This would be a very important movie to me, and seeing it as a 34-year-old man, I do see it as a very good film. I don't connect with it on the level that I thought I would, but what I think is very surprising to me is that while the prime group of kids is looking for this body, there's the other group of kids with the same motivations, kind of, looking for the body. The Cobras, basically, yeah, as well. I thought that was very interesting that, like, okay, so everyone's on the same page with the result of this. It's just like different types of people can have the same motivations. And I thought, overall, I'm like, that's an interesting message for kids to take away. So...
And I think very clearly once they saw themselves mirrored in the older boys, they were like, oh, we're not doing this for the right reason.
No, I got this gun. It's going to go real bad.
Yeah, like, they're looking at the older version of themselves that they always thought were shitheads, and they're like, oh, yeah, we did not try to find this boy for any good reason.
Oh, I think what surprised me about the movie, too, and I actually, being such a Stephen King fan, I actually never read The Body. So I kind of want to. Yeah, I want to after seeing Stand By Me. But I think what surprised me, and maybe it shouldn't have because Stephen King does this so well. But the moment, I mean, it's one of the more famous scenes where River Phoenix's character is crying about like an event that happened, and him and what's the main character's name?
Will Wheaton's character, Gordo?
Gordo, yeah. They share this really like vulnerable moment together. And what I thought, especially for the year the movie came out, I thought it was really nice that I didn't feel suffocated by like testosterone and by like even though they're young boys, I didn't feel like they were trying to put on a show. Like, it was nice that they showed young boys being vulnerable in a way that's usually seen as more feminine or more like, I don't know, maybe it's just I thought that was yeah, they all cry.
Like, they all cry.
Yeah, and it's great to see them be vulnerable. And I think what was so key about their age is because they are right at the cusp of probably being taught that they have to hide their feelings, but
they have to be cobras or nothing. Those are their options.
Right, and they're not like.
And they choose something else.
Yeah, so I thought that was a very surprising, but like really catches you off guard in the best possible way. It's like, oh my God, they're being so open.
I think the acting is what's surprising. Like, looking back at Will Wheaton, who's like, I don't know, friggin' 10, and River Phoenix, who was 12 maybe.
I think they were all
like
between
12.
10 and 13.
Yeah. The acting's pretty strong. And one of the elements that stuck with me, and I like that Stephen King does this, like he's not a proud writer. He says this a lot. He'll borrow and steal from wherever. And he presents this as a kind of compelling, quest narrative. And I do love that moment where they confront the junkyard dog. And this is the Cerebus figure before they kind of go into their own kind of netherworld as part of their journey. And when I watched it the first time, I remember not getting that at all. And knowing what I know now and just kind of recalling some of the elements in the film that stuck with me, he does such a good job of he sticks very, very closely to well-worn narrative structures. He doesn't deviate. But it doesn't, you have to know a lot about just narrative structure and plot structure to really, for that to stand out, because I think the story and the characters kind of...
Cerebus goes after balls.
You just kind of miss it. Yeah, it's...
Also, that pie eating... See,
that was clever though.
That was hilarious. Like, and they somehow made it like it was out of place a little bit, but like kind of in the best possible way. Like, you needed that moment of like, what is it? Like, I remember halfway through that scene where like, or towards the end of it when everyone was vomiting, I'm just like, what did this movie just become? But it was like awesome because it's hilarious.
I think it actually shows the ingenuity. That scene shows the ingenuity of the kids, because that was a story being told about another kid, right? And it was just like, so...
No, it was a story he made up. He seems to be a writer. Yeah. And they said, tell us one of your stories, but not a scary one.
Right. So, okay.
And then
it just goes on and on and on.
And then they debate the ending that he should, like, kill people or, like, go away with the Lone Ranger or something.
Like the most boy conversation.
But what that story shows is that character was someone who was willing to take a hit in order to give everyone else a hit, where it's like, I'm going to ingest all this crap knowing I'm going to throw up, and I know you'll throw up because you'll see me throw up, and then because you're all up there, I'll be forgotten about and you'll feel the embarrassment.
And they don't know he did that. They don't know he maliciously did it. It's not. That's not their perspective.
Here's the thing too that I think everyone takes away from that movie now is it's not just a movie about kids going on a journey of self-discovery or kind of education of a group of young boys. So it's not just a Bildungsroman. It's also the story of the education of a writer. So he starts out telling stories that are not good stories, right? Because only one thing happens. The kid keeps eating. It's not much of a story. That's why all he does is, right, he eats too much. What happens after that? He vomits. Not much of a story. But after he has this experience where he is vulnerable, he does see, my choices are, I can be an asshole man or I can be who I am.
Yeah.
That's the narrative story that he experiences that then turns him into a writer. So I think I think the surprise about that is there is this sort of depth to King that we don't often get. Like in Misery, it's sort of the undoing of a writer. And as much as the Kathy Bates character wants to destroy the writer because he's destroyed the world that she's so invested in.
I think unraveling is definitely a theme in Misery.
Well, unraveling the writer. I mean, in that his stories are often about writing.
Yeah.
As much as they're not always, okay, not always, obviously not always, but some of his stories are about writers, and Misery and Stand By Me are about the building of a writer, the Bildungsroman, the education of a writer.
Yeah,
and Misery is this, yes, that's right. And Misery is this sort of unraveling of a writer who nevertheless still right? Survives. Does he become a better writer? Meh.
But he still writes.
But he still writes. Yeah.
Matches.
So I thought that's kind of what surprised me after the fact,
But is it like a distinctly American theme to have people to go into the woods to like discover themselves or find something out about themselves?
I just because we saw a film recently, The House of the Clock in Its Walls, which I thought was a really fun film. It had its issues, sure, but like I'm happy it did well. There is, I believe the answer is kind of yes, with the exception of German fairy tales. That's something we have in common with them. And in this film, a character, the villain, goes into the woods and discovers something about himself while he's fighting in World War I or II. I don't know of any other stories outside of the culture of like the American pantheon of story and German fairy tales where people do go into the woods as often. I'm sure there's one in every culture, sure, but I don't know.
Well, like Spirited Away, she goes into the woods, but she goes into a city, so it's not quite the same story.
Well, it's not. Is Spirited Away, which I freaking love. I kind of want to say it's not the woods that.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. Like she goes, it's much more about this fantasy land she enters. It's not about, they are in the woods for a while, but it's not about like nature. And it's also based on an American tale, so it's based on Alice in Wonderland.
I think the answer is definitely yes. I mean, all of the story of Into the Woods by Stephen Sondheim explores that. I mean, it's in the lyrics too. It's like into the woods, the journey, blah, blah, blah. And it's like the whole theme is going into the woods to learn something about yourself so that you can make the changes you need to. So I think that's definitely, and that's a very American
There's a bunch of really good writers, historians, I should say, about early American literature. And if you want, I can give you a list. But what a lot of them are looking at in early American literature is what was the relationship of early American, they're talking about English settlers in
Sorry, my cat's pooping.
Salem and Plymouth. What was their relationship to the, geographical space around them? So they invest the woods, the wilderness, with intense diabolical energy because that's where Native Americans lived. So there's this very racialized, genocidal kind of fury in the American context that isn't there in the European context. So when the Grimm's fairy tales, kids walk into the woods, bad shit happens. Because probably it's also recording the moment where the woods are shrinking because there's over-harvesting of the woods. There's probably something like that. But genocidal colonialism in the American context gives us this trope of the woods as distinctly racialized, I think. But that doesn't mean... it's just to say that the context for those stories in America is a little bit
it's like don't go into the woods, that's where the others are. Exactly. And that's kind of like the whole of the village by they even play that game where they stand on the stump and they have their backs turned to the unknown or the woods and they have that's where those we don't speak of.
He's sort of teasing that
which they talk about all the time.
Bit.
Those we don't speak of and they speak about them in the whole movie.
It's very interesting though that we have that these cultures use the woods as an example of don't go in there, that's the unknown, when African cultures and Asian cultures, specifically Japanese cultures, the Japanese culture uses the ocean as that purpose for them, which is very, very interesting.
That's cool.
Yeah, it's geographical.
Yeah. I mean, when I think of the quintessential woods story, it's not until the 19th century, I would say, and you get to Young Goodman Brown. The Hawthorn short story where it's a Puritan couple and the husband, and they're just desperately in love. It's very sweet at the beginning. They really love each other. And he just starts to think that maybe his wife is walking to the woods. Does she need to go in there? What's she going in there for? And he thinks she's going in there for nefarious purposes. And he starts to spy on her. And you can see over the course, he convinces himself that she's a witch. And by the end, we're not really sure if what he's seeing is true or not, but we know that he believes it's true, and it completely undoes their relationship. So it's definitely a good metaphor for marriage, but it's one of the beginnings, I think, around the same time Poe is writing too. But Poe, a lot of his stuff is in the city, The Man of the Crowd, The Black Cat, or places like the South, Fall of the House of Usher. He's not really like I went into the woods and these terrible things happen kind of guy. I think that's
space, and then
yeah,
you're stuck in that
or
space.
or too many people in the city, and we don't know who they are, and that creeps me out. I think it's Irving that gives us the headless horseman, that guy.
Yep.
That's probably where we get some of that.
But like at some point
Woods
it
are
does
scary
switch
kind of
over to not just being scary, but that you learn something. Like Ray Bradbury and Stephen King both have this like kids go off into the woods and they gain like a new understanding from like having like this is a
Yeah.
very like Thoreau thought, right? That you know if I'm in the woods I'll be a more whole person or it will complete me in some way. Even though it's evil and scary, and this is actually a thing I've heard, and maybe you said it, that like Brits set horror in the city and Americans set horror in the woods. But we also kind of believe it's good for us.
I'm trying to think of a horror story. I guess the Headless Horseman, it's certainly good for the listener of the story to take something away from that about maybe humility and, not.
Yeah. So we have a weird relationship with the woods. It's full of monsters, but maybe puberty.
Yeah, but I think very early, right on to Rekha's point in terms of like when we started writing about this stuff as an American culture, it's because you can't see the woods. We had not yet discovered the prairie at this time in our culture. Right. So like you're not going to have the same story, kids going off into the prairie. No, you can see for miles on that thing. There's no surprises. Nothing's lurking around you. This isn't like the Lost World with high grass and raptors sneaking around. That's not what this is. It's you can't see what's hiding behind the tree. Slender Man lives in the woods. He does not live on the prairie.
There's a really cool moment where, in the diaries and writings of early American Puritans, where I can't remember who it is exactly, but they say something along the lines of, when you look at the woods, you can't see through the sort of undergrowth, meaning that because the woods are shrinking in England, you look through a stand of trees, you look through the stand of trees, you kind of can see into it, but because they're so dense in America, you can't see anything. Plus all these Native Americans are in there. So it's
They're just hanging out.
and they didn't, and think about it, Native Americans would go through the woods in a certain path to get to where they needed to go and then go back and they knew where they were going. It was like, streets in a suburb kind of thing, but not for the Puritans. So when they walked in, they didn't know where they were. They didn't know where they were going. So different, yeah. So I think it starts out. Now, when does it become informative? I think you're right. I think it's 19th century and people like Thoreau who are taking it back to mean like this is where I discover myself and whatever.
Yeah, because it is very like two different thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like that this place isn't evil, that being in the middle of it helps me somehow.
And that's exactly the moment in the 19th century that this sort of the last the idea that Native Americans were a disappearing race is common.
But I also think that's got the two opposing views on like you said, it's full of monsters, but also it's a good thing. Makes sense because self-discovery can be scary at the same time, and change can be scary. And I think that that's maybe at the base of why the woods represents those two things. It's like, oh, well, there's unknowns, but they're necessary and they can be a good thing. We just have to, some trees will be hiding something monstrous and some will be hiding something useful.
There is, I think, but with you're talking about the Hawthorn story earlier. Thinking about it now, I don't know. Like if you look at the woods in a fantastical, not outside of fairy tales and outside of horror or something scary, it's where the elves live, and it's always this place of like hidden magic and healing. Oh, go into the woods to find the spring. Go into the woods to find these items. Into the woods. There are scarier moments, but when you get past that point of adolescence, you don't fear the woods anymore. There's nothing horrific there. You kind of know. You will take the Thoreau approach. You will take the hermit approach.
That's where you get into the wild, right?
Yeah,
the guy
exactly.
McCandless who goes to
And then he died
Alaska.
in the woods.
And then he died in the woods.
This is a weird question, and maybe it's just bad writing, but Ray Bradbury is considered a fairly good writer.
Yes.
So maybe it's just the movie itself, because I don't remember the book, although I went through a big Ray Bradbury and Stephen King phase at the same exact time. Like
What
12.
an interesting combo.
Like, I loved reading older
I think it makes
stuff.
sense.
I liked reading, like, what things came from. So once I found Stephen King, I was like, what is he looking at? And I started reading that. But, like, why? Because, like, Mountshroud really ends on a lesson, and he goes, like, I was teaching you not to fear me. Like, or fear death. And he is essentially death. But, like, why? It really bothered me, because it seemed like a strange lesson.
He does this interesting thing in the very beginning, which it seems as if They meet him, and he's bothered by them. And then he takes... Mountshroud is bothered by the 4 kids because they see Pip run in. And then he takes a moment, okay, this is the tree. And right before they go on the journey, he looks at them, and he makes some offhanded comment about their costumes. And he's like, well, wait a minute. You don't even understand what you're dressing like up.
I take exception to that.
Yeah, it's like, wait, hang on. Now it's time. It's almost like he's like, I will educate you in what your costumes are. Because you said earlier, it's like these different cultures' representation of death. I find the gargoyles to me don't represent death, and the druids were just whatever, but the other 2 were fine. So it seems as if he kind of, again, you're right, I think it is the movie, not Bradbury himself in terms of narrative structure. It seems as if it's the movie wanted to say, let's talk about your costumes and where they come from, some of which have to do with death and how societies deal with death. Because like the skeleton, that kid was not thinking Day of the Dead. That kid was thinking there's a skeleton in a grave. That's all this is. So then you're right. He does do this thing at the end where he's like, now you've learned not to fear me. Oh, Tom comes up with that actually, because it's Tom's final lesson. And then it's just kind of like, oh, what was the point of this?
My cats are having a boyfriend spat.
You guys make up. It's important to a lot of people that you stay together.
It affects all of us.
The internet needs you. So yeah, we
All
don't
right, so
quite...
the whole premise of that of Halloween Trait.
Yeah, it starts out, we're gonna get our friend's soul back, and he's like, let me teach you about your costumes, which is like a 4th grade weird lesson that he's got to impose on that. Yeah, it doesn't. It's
You
like
don't look like a witch. You look like a slut.
yeah, it's like a
weird,
Dickie
but-
Blues Clues. Yeah, but I have to say,
Clues.
there was a moment at the end where he's like, why are you dressed as a skeleton? And Tom's like, because of my name. He's like, have I taught you nothing? I'm like, part of me is so identified with him as someone who's like had those conversations with students. Where have you been for 6 weeks? Told you multiple times, no.
What does the whale represent? A whale?
No!
I very much enjoyed when he would show up in disguise, but like clearly it was him, and the kids
Scooby-Doo
every time
level
were
disguise.
surprised. Like with the Day of the Dead when he comes over and he's all like covered up and he has like the sugar skulls, and all the kids totally just don't even know it's him. It's the same voice, it's
Yeah.
the same hand,
Yeah.
and the kids
And
are
the
like,
same weird
oh
skull.
yeah, and
It's
then
not hard.
yeah. And then every time he reveals himself, they're like, oh God, that we didn't know.
This is the same type of kids that would sit down and be like, yeah, Batman and I mean, Clark Kent, Superman, 2 totally different guys.
He takes off the glasses.
Yeah. Again, you should see Mystery Men. It's great.
I've seen Mystery Man. It's amazing.
It is.
So I play this game of what 2 characters from each are the most similar. Like who sort of links up as being and we can and let's put it this way, it's not just Vern and Wally, okay? As the fat kids. Also Jerry O'Connell, man, I laughed so hard when he cried running with the train, and I couldn't stop, and it was like on and off. So like cut away to the other kids looking worried. Off. Come back to him, and I burst out laughing every time. It was like,
I told Aidan the other day, I'm like, I want to travel back in time and tell, like, fat little Jerry O'Connell, it's like, oh, buddy, you're not just going to grow up to marry Rebecca Romaine, you're going to steal her from Uncle Jesse. That's how
Hottie and a half.
that's how attractive you're going to be.
Smart guy, right? Isn't he kind of a smart guy? Like,
I read she had a crush on him as a child. Like apparently they were at some party with
There's
like
hope for
her
everyone.
old like college buddies, and they basically revealed this. They were like, "Hey, in college, like I was her roommate. She had a poster of you in her room." And I don't know if this is true or not, but like I love that story that like she's the creepy stalker.
Wait,
Yeah,
hang
me
on.
too.
Because forgive me for not remembering Jerry O'Connell's filmography, but wasn't like his successes, like, wasn't it like just,
Sliders.
yeah, so she had a Sliders poster in her room?
I think it was Stand By Me.
The fat kid poster from Stand By Me?
Like she had a huge crush on him.
Oh, Rebecca Romaine, your stock is rising in terms of an interesting person.
I know. I read it like on IMDb. And
Yeah.
So if we're not doing Vern and Wally, because they're just like the fat kid trope, and that's not an interesting one to think about as much as other characters.
Maybe Gordo and Tom.
A little bit, but like Tom's is not as much of the leader because Pipkin's supposed to be the leader.
Yeah, but he's the one with the most narrative. Yeah.
And I feel like Tom was always just like Tom, and the only real thing he learned apparently was not to be afraid of death.
No. Tom has the most growth because he's like, I always wanted to be the leader.
No, compared to Gord
From Stand By Me, I mean, like compared
That's
to
what I'm saying. Like they have the most growth in the both stories.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think in Stand By Me, it's even more growth.
Oh, well, they're more complex characters.
Yeah.
Other
I can
than
see
that, I don't know who would be.
I really felt like Chris and Pipkin. Because Chris is that, like, emotional core for everybody that they can relate back to, that they feel comfortable around. Like Teddy leans against Chris when he cries. He doesn't go to the other kids for solace. Because he knows, even as an asshole as Chris is, he's, like, not going to make fun of him for this. He's not going to, like, he's going to be, like, a good hugger.
Well, I guess you could say Mountrout and the Body are the same.
Oh, and Mountshad and Kiefer Sutherland.
Ace.
Those names were amazing. All of them were amazing. Like Denny. What was his name? Dennis? What is his name? Denny? That's not a name.
Not even in the 60s, I don't think.
I will say this, though, for the Halloween tree, for including a female character who's just kind of there, no attention was drawn to the fact that she was a female, except for the fact that she was in a witch's costume.
Yeah, she was very much like one of the boys type of thing, without being like, she was a tomboy. Like she would, I thought that's a good point.
She was wearing a dress, and she just showed
and,
up.
and she's like, I just don't want Tom to see me cry. And I was like, you go, girl.
Yeah.
Don't let him see you cry, because you should be fucking crying. No, I am kidding.
I wonder how Stand By Me would be different with a female character in it.
Yeah,
I've always
Female
thought-
cast.
Yeah, it could be Mean Girls. I mean, it could, be bitchy girls, the older sister who's like, we're going to take all the glory. You could easily do that. Yeah.
They probably will.
Great.
Not set in like any present day where kids just take off for 2 days.
Yeah.
And no parental unit notices them at all.
Oh yeah, the 80s, like, Where Are the Parents trope.
Even in the 90s, like Hocus Pocus, like those kids, like they show up to their parents' dance. There are witches, sure, you're not going to believe they're actual witches, but like they put a spell on these parents, and the kids are just still kind of like, dude, we told you. Parents don't care. They never care.
I think one of the producers of Halloween Tree produced Hocus Pocus, or one of the writers is the same. Like Mark Young produced the Halloween Tree. I was looking up some of the names to see who, because the guy that directed it literally directed like, the Little Pony Junior's holiday special. Like, he did not do very much that's notable. And obviously Rob Reiner did a ton of things. Rob Reiner did Misery, didn't he?
Probably. He did a ton of things.
I think he did. I think he did Misery as well, which is actually really interesting that they're both by the same guy. He wrote really glowingly of Stand By Me about how, like, it taught him to direct. That he felt like having the structure of, like, a Stephen King story, like, gave him, a lot to work with, and that he learned how to do things.
I will say this, as someone who's done it more times than he thought he would, as a director, working with kids will probably teach you more about directing and filmmaking and how to work with actors than working with adults. It's just because their emotions and the way that you deal with them are so unfiltered, and there's no mind game, there's no strategy behind it, there's no like an adult actress or adult actor.
What's my motivation?
Yeah, it's not just the motivation. It's like, I want to do this scene my way. I'll give you 2 and you give me 1. The kids are just like, what do you want? Okay, then they try it. They can't do that thing because they don't know those emotions. So then you have to work with them to help find it, as opposed to an adult who's only calling on his own experiences that he knows, and he doesn't want to hear your voice usually. So that's very interesting that Rob Reiner said that.
I know when Teddy cries, he got him to pull up some really horrible memory. Like, he sat down with Corey Feldman and was just like, worked with him to get that moment.
Oh,
And
I'm
it
sure
was
he
like-
thought about it.
And he's like really bawling, and it was actually supposed to not, like, camera wasn't supposed to be rolling, but he was like, we'll just try it, and because he was just kind of fake crying, and they were like, and so that's like really like raw.
That is one of the few movies with children that it never has a child actor kind of moment. To friggin' hate child acting. Like, it's so painful.
Sometimes it's painful,
Yeah, and it, no real fault on the kid. They're not real actors yet. They're mostly kids.
Great kid actor.
Yeah, it's good kid. Yeah, what are some other movies with like actually good kid acting?
The Piano, Anna Paquin. She was nominated for an Oscar for that, deservedly so.
Paper Moon is amazing.
Paper Moon.
Yeah.
Which I've reviewed, and that episode's intact, so that one's coming out. That one's intact. That one did not have audio issues. She won youngest actress to ever win an Oscar. She's still the youngest because she was 9.
Is she still the youngest?
She is still the youngest.
No. The girl from the Fantastical Beasts movie.
Oh, Beast of the Southern Wild.
Yeah,
What's her name?
I don't remember.
To say.
Oh, the kid from Kramer versus Kramer was
No,
really
I've never
good.
seen that.
Really?
I read it as a Mad Magazine movie, where they used to do movies, and they would cartoonize them, and they would do the similar dialogue, but they'd make more jokes. And that's the only way I know that movie still.
Kramer versus Kramer. I'm an adult child of divorce. They got divorced my parents got divorced when I was older. That movie came out at the perfect time for it to come out because divorce rates were on the rise and it was normalizing and there's a lot of anger going on. And I've read about this movie so many times, and finally seeing it, being like, oh, this is holy shit. This is like Library of Congress type level of movie for this country.
It's almost a document.
Yeah.
It's not even. That's a good point.
I have a theory that Dustin Hoffman doesn't remember he was Captain Hook in Hook because they were doing a retrospective with him, and he saw a few clips, like they were showing him like clips, and then he kind of leans forwards and squints at the Hook clips, and I'm like, you don't remember you were in that movie, do you?
That movie, there are movies, I'm starting to build a category of movies that when you describe them to other people that have never seen them or heard of them, they sound like you're having a stroke.
Yeah.
Like I described Interview with a Vampire to somebody in the cast and they were like, what? I was like, it's Brad Pitt and Tom Cruise.
You're just saying names.
And Antonio Banderas and Christian Slater and Kirsten Dunst are all in a movie together. And they're like, no, that's not possible. That does not happen. And I was like, and it was directed by a big time director, Neil Jordan.
Oh, yeah.
And he's directed other vampire movies, which is even weirder.
That kind of borderlines on, like, I know SNL kind of played into this perfectly, the mom celebrity translator, where you're just like,
funniest thing.
Did you see this? Because moms famously are like, just,
She
you know,
can't get any celebrity.
no.
They've got 2 eyes and a nose. You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. But it's just like, because people don't have this knowledge, they're not in this world all the time, they're like, I don't know, but like Tom Cruise Mission Impossible, okay, we got that. But you put them all together and like, I think I would have heard of that movie. I think so. It's like, well, it was what, 94, 93? It's kind of like, yeah, it's like, you weren't really paying attention, and you know, it's okay. It's okay. It's okay.
I'm really excited, speaking of vampire movies, to watch The Lost Boys. I have to re-record one.
I love that movie.
And it's with Zoe Arnold Connor, and I gave them the option to re-record what we'd done or to record a new subject, and Zoe's my last intern that's never seen The Lost Boys. So, like, for some reason, this is like a mountain I need to climb. Like, I've seen it with Kieran, I've seen it with Zane, and I was like, we have to watch this. So we're going to watch it with Peter Pan. And Peter Pan's going to be a shit show of racism. I already know. Like the Disney,
of them.
like the Disney, because animated. But it's going to be terrible, and I know I'm going to hate it. It's one of those things that so many things borrow from, like Wizard of Oz, but I actually can't stand Peter Pan at this point, whereas I'll watch something that's based on Wizard of Oz. I'm like, this is fine.
Here's my question, just to talk into the racism, because not why we're here, but the racism of Peter Pan is, once upon a time, the show on ABC, which is owned by Disney, when they did Tiger Lily, she was Native American. Same year, or the year after, when they did it with Garrett Hedlund, Tiger Lily was Rooney Mara.
Someone got fired and someone got hired in that year?
Yeah.
Do you ever see the Christopher Walken version? That's my favorite.
The live action one where he coughs and just kind of falls asleep in the middle of it. I haven't seen it, but I saw the clips from The Soup, and that's good enough.
He's just like phoning it in, like so clearly phoning it. Paycheck.
It's, you think of that Krusty the Clown moment where it's like, what was I supposed to do? They drove a dump truck full of money up to my house. And then Bart, like, ironically, is like, I don't know, Krusty, I would never put my name on an inferior product. And there's just Bart Simpson on, like, Pez dispensers and, like, those little mazes that you get in Happy Meals.
Where's some more of my questions? I flipped over my pages. We're gonna do 2 more, I think. So most similar characters. We talked about that a little bit. What do you think, like, the characters discover? Like, I mean, I know that Mondrian is like, you've discovered not to fear death. But if we're gonna take that very clear
Out of the blue.
lesson,
It's like Scott Pilgrim has discovered power.
So random. It was just so random.
and I assume the Halloween tree, if I remember correctly, is a little more like a poem. So maybe it was like they had to tease out a lot more things, but I could be wrong.
Stand By Me is, like, more of a writer's movie, and the Halloween Tree is a field trip? Like...
It felt like a trippy magic school.
Well, yeah, it's like a slightly darker magic school bus. Yeah. And we're going to talk about death all the way, and our kids are like,
Miss Frizzle looks.
I love that theory that Miss Frizzle is a Time Lord, and the school buses are TARDIS, but...
I love Magic School.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong.
But it's like, it's more magic school busy, so their lessons are more textbook lessons, where Stand By Me is more like personal lessons.
Yeah.
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 It's like Day of the Dead.
It is really weird. I actually really loved. I wrote that down, and then
That was
I sort
actually
of came
creepy,
to my.
yeah.
I came to my own conclusion as I was writing things. because he won't go in the church. And I was like, really? Is this some bullshit Christianity thing? And I actually thought about what like churches represent, which is sanctuary from things like him. So that made more sense than like he's weirdly like actually a demon and can't like deal with Christianity. It's more like what churches. The other places are houses of the dead or ways to worship the dead. Yeah. And a church is not that thing. It is like a warding off of like evil and or bad things befalling you. Not even evil because death isn't.
So is Mountshroud death?
I think so, but then he dies. His pumpkin dies at the end of it.
I thought he was a vampire.
His pumpkin was another terrifying thing.
It explained his head, though. I was like, that explains your head. I'm so glad they did that at the end. Because through the whole thing, and I'm like, but the back of your head. Why are we not talking about that?
I kind of want to just go back to the
lesson.
No, not the kind of the lesson, but in line with like Mountshroud's pumpkins. You said that they represent like people's souls. The way I thought it was like representation of each Halloween year, like a baby New Year to like maybe he's baby New Year, because it talks about like this Halloween this happened in this pumpkin and that happened in this one. So maybe I'm not, but then it maybe isn't because like Pip steals his year's pumpkin. It's a little unclear.
Yeah, what happens?
And they definitely do like an analogy between the pumpkin and the sugar skulls, and definitely the sugar skulls are like eating your soul, like taking it back.
And their names are written on them.
Yeah.
Except you don't see Jenny's name. It's not there.
It's not.
It's like the girl doesn't have a name.
It's too low a problem.
I have a question actually. Does and this might be like the dumbest question ever, but I mean, we all know that Stephen King can write children and very well because he often does. But what about Ray Bradbury? Because it seems like Halloween Tree is not his usual audience. Because like you think of Fahrenheit 451, you think of like all his other
He
works.
writes a lot about kids though.
Does he? I don't know.
I'm trying to think of the stories. There's Fahrenheit 451.
Oh, really?
Or maybe after, it's like, or one of them dies on the trip.
Oh wait, the body?
Yeah. When the kids are in it, they're very much like Pipkin, though. They're like the brightest boy in the room. Something Wicked This Way Comes. Very classic kid story. I love that story.
Well, that's the one thing that really angered me the most about the Halloween Tree, and we talked on it earlier, was we don't really see Pip. Every time we see Pip, he's like screwed. Like, he's the greatest boy in the world, we're told, and he didn't laugh at someone and everything we talked about earlier. But, like, we don't really see what makes him that good. It's only secondhand stories.
I disagree.
Okay. Go ahead.
Well, in those moments where, they're like, I think Tom says, this is a good example. Tom says, your dying is my fault because I wished it, because I wanted to sometimes be leader. Yeah. And he's like, it's okay, you can be leader sometimes. Like, he immediately just forgives him and makes room for him.
That's fair. Okay.
That's a pretty deep little kid. I don't believe he exists ever. That's the question. Was Pip ever alive to begin with?
That's the most unrealistic part of the movie.
Oh, no, I do believe he's a good kid. I'm just saying we don't see, like, him being the greatest kid in the world.
See the zeal.
Yeah.
Well, all those kids in the Halloween Tree were too morally upright. They were too morally good.
No. I think that's an interesting point, because I was thinking about, like, this movie must have come out in the 70s or 60s because it feels so staid.
Yeah.
And it is the morality. There's a kind of moral, like, these kids don't have to learn to be morally good. They already are. And so what do they have to learn is, like, where the fuck their costume comes from? Like, that's all that's left for them to learn. Because then they tack on the learning about death at the end, which they are already, like, years ahead. They're like, I'm willing to give up my 81st year for my young friend because, I mean, they can figure that out even, So, yeah, their moral arc is short because they start out so good. Exactly. Whereas I think the moral arc for the kids in Stand By Me is much longer. Because up till the very last moment, they're like, yeah, we're going to find this body, we're going to be cool. And then they're like, oh my God, this is a kid like us. And he's dead, and people are just treating him like he's nothing. And so their moral arc is much.
Oh yeah, the anonymous phone call was their like proving point. We're like, it's anonymous. We're not going to tell you who we are. The kid's over there. Go find him.
Yeah, and they put a blanket over him. They leave a blanket so that he's like sort of sheltered.
I
but
know.
Something with this way comes. The kids do learn a thing. Yeah. It's Jim Nightshade and Tom Holloway, and they're two boys born on either side of midnight on Halloween, and they're best friends. But Jim always he's the kid that wants to leave the town, and Tom is the kid that's probably going to stay. And they have to sort of realize that, like, neither of them is wrong. and that like they don't have to speed up to grow up, and because this evil carnival comes and they realize it's evil and they're trying to like, but they're also trying to benefit from it a little bit because there's a merry-go-round that can age you up or down, and so Jim wants to go on the merry-go-round and become older very, very quickly, and he sort of has to realize like that's a bad thing. You should not like try to grow up too quickly. And Tom has to realize that you can't sort of stay young. That he can't hold his friend back and say like, let's stay children forever. Yeah. And it's really, I love that story. Like
that's a nice lesson. I think the kids in this story don't get much to learn.
At least in the film depiction, like the way the film depicts it, it doesn't do their arc justice. I don't know if the storybook is any different, but it probably, if it's a storybook, probably not.
I don't know. I read it so long ago, and again, these were short things I could have reread.
Well, going back to Rekha's point, it's like they learn, okay, they're morally good people, and then they learn not to fear death. Like on the base level, you're kind of complete as a person now.
So he must be deaf. He just kind of shows up in the timeshare.
Property's not
timeshare haunted houses. Get on it. I'm sure that's a category on Airbnb, by the way. Like if you really, because there's stray houses. Anything else you want to talk about? And then I'm going to ask you about which animated film makes you cry.
I mean, I like that the kids have, that both stories are about kids who are on a journey and they come back from the journey and they're changed. I think Stand By Me, I think enough. It would be interesting to see that same movie told from the point of view of Ace and Eyeball.
And Eyeball was Vern's brother.
Yeah, older brother. That's right.
Who does go into the army, right?
I don't know. I don't remember anybody actually going into the army.
I don't remember either.
Vern becomes like a dump truck driver or something.
Chris,
right?
In the beginning.
The robbery.
No, he breaks up a bar fight. Chris turns into like the moral. It's like Chris and Gordo, who become like the the average, like well-balanced people, and Chris pursues this like higher calling life, and then steps into a bar fight and gets stabbed in the middle of it, because he tries to break it.
Yeah, he tries to be like, "Hey guys, cool down," and like one of them shivs him, and he just.
Yeah, and and Richard Dreyfuss finds this out in a newspaper article. No one even calls the man. Well, they drift apart. I know, I get it, but still.
They drift apart. I know.
Life happens.
Yeah, Vern becomes a dump truck driver and has a bunch of kids. Teddy becomes kind of like a handyman, like slightly homeless guy, like just drifter. Chris becomes a lawyer, even though he was the one that stole the lunch money and he tried to return it. It's such a heartbreaking story too. Like it's so.
That was hard too. Yeah.
And then Gordo becomes and Gordo's such a weird name for him.
It's such a weird name.
But he becomes a writer. Because there's that whole, like, I don't want to take the college prep courses. I want to stay with you guys. And then he's like, well, if you come with me, Chris, I'll do this. Chris is like, I can't keep up. Like, I'm supposed to be, like, a shop class kid. And they actually, and that's that was, to me, I had forgotten that part. That, like, Chris doesn't just fulfill, like, his destiny. That he's supposed to be this, like, dirty, towny kid.
Yeah.
Well, there is one more thing, at least from my point of view, if you ask anything. I would say in this style, in this instance, I'd say that the animation underserved the story.
Oh yeah.
Because I feel that had the Halloween Tree been a live action movie, you would have gotten something a bit deeper. But because it was made, Cartoon Network was 92, and this was 93. And it was released 93 anyway. It certainly started made maybe even 92. Whether it had anything to do with it or not, you weren't really getting anything much deeper because animation hadn't really gotten to that.
And Hanna-Barbera never told those kinds of stories. That's the other thing. The production company making this does not tell those kinds of stories. It's not like, Don Bluth going off and making Secret of Nim, where he was doing Disney films and said, I have something deeper to say, and really pushed at it. This felt like a stretch for Hanna-Barbera to not just, like, do their hokey... Because they're the Flintstones and...
Although, when did Watership Down, the animated version, come out?
The 80s, I think.
I think animation was looking, there's probably examples of animated movies.
Oh yeah, I'm just saying that as a studio, they don't have that drive of like story quality.
Yeah, there's no way you're making Watership Down and making that target kids. Yeah. That was definitely made for an older audience. It's almost like you're going to make Jonathan Livingston Seagull as an animated film. the 5-year-olds aren't exactly getting this.
Well, now that you said that thing about, like, gave a background about the making of the Halloween Tree movie, it definitely feels like a vehicle rather than a standalone piece. Like,
And it won an Emmy. It won a daytime Emmy.
Don't
So
ask me how.
yeah, but Stand By Me obviously doesn't feel like a vehicle for anything. It's just this self-contained story. But yeah, it definitely felt like Halloween Tree was more of like a promise rather than like the carrying out of the promise. Because like you said, it was probably just like a vehicle for Hanna-Barbera to be like, oh, let's make
we
Cartoon
can do
Network.
more things and stories, and
so it's probably
we
why
can
it felt
tell more. We can have more interesting styles because then they did Johnny Bravo and Powerpuff
Loved
Girls were the first ones in Dexter's Lab, and
classic after classic.
and then
pretty much.
Ed, and Eddie came
I
out.
saw that one.
Ed, and Eddie is weird.
That's what I've heard. It doesn't seem like my speed.
Because even if you look at the other movies around the same time that were made for kids, like Never-Ending Story, I could go into like a whole essay on the
For
first
Nightmare
and
Before
second.
Christmas. I mean, very similar. A Halloween theme.
But they are live action. Because I could even argue... I could argue though that is I know it's not strict animation, but you're making it's more target. These are adults making a movie they want to make technically for themselves, and they just know that the look will appeal to kids. That's the studio's backing.
I'm
behind
pretty
it.
sure that's like almost the exact same year, and it's light years ahead of the Halloween Tree in terms of like even
Everything.
like just motivation of the characters. Like you really understand what Jack Skellington wants.
And for like Watership Down, that source material, like I said, you're not, it can't be done. James and the Giant Peach, though, years later, same style of animation, same studio. It's a younger original content. It's a storybook. It's a picture book.
If you're using animation to do Watership Down, I mean that novel had been around for a while.
Well, there's a few exceptions.
Yeah, but so when is it that? So you can tell with the graphic novel when Mouse 1 wins the Pulitzer Prize. That's when the graphic novel is considered like, vehicle for. Yeah, that's what I'm. Yeah, that's
Bakshi does a lot of stuff in the '70s, and I can't think of much.
Because by the early '80s, when he's doing Mighty Mouse, I remember watching it with my mom, and she didn't watch Saturday cartoons, and I was in college. And I wasn't really watching Saturday cartoons, but we both watched Mighty Mouse because there was something that he was doing stylistically. We're like, what is this? This is
And he did like
fascinating.
Wizards and Felix the Cat, and those are very much for adults. They were not a kid's.
But I think stylistically, so not just subject-wise, that's the difference. So again, to go back to the 70s example, like I think that matters, that you don't have to do Watership Down as animation.
Ooh, I'm gonna count
I mean, they are animals, and claymation would have been weird. But they're choosing to do this for, I mean, it is a complex story. It's sad and everything. But what I guess what I'm trying to get at is, what are the milestones that lead up to, I'll say it, I think it's The Simpsons, where people are like, animation is just a way of telling a story. It's not that you're telling a story just for kids because it's animated. I think it happens sooner, but there are moments. They're not part of a trend.
Yes, and then I think also to add to that. No. I believe you're right, and I believe. Although I will say, in Watership Down's case, as a studio, you're looking at cost and you're looking at just how do we pull this off, animate it, and they know that with the history of with what's attached to this book and everything, that people will see it, and it's almost like, and I know it's your favorite movie, Hunchback of Notre Dame. I love this movie, having recently seen it.
I do too.
This is not a movie that Disney was like. They let Alan Menken do what he wanted, and then they checked in on like 75% of the way through, and they're like,
oh God,
what the hell did we let happen? Put the gargoyles in. This is not for kids, or like it's not for their kids. To go back to all of this, I do think that something like Watership Down is like one of those exceptions where it's kind of like, okay, we're going to make a movie now like Sky Captain. We'll just try it in black and white. Like, we'll just try it. There wasn't the trends, these moments, these milestones you're talking about. Yes, they do happen. And I think now if you look at where we are as people, like this, I would say the millennials are growing up being exposed to animation, and then millennials being, given the ability to be showrunners, to grow up with The Simpsons, which absolutely, I credit The Simpsons as bringing adults into the animation fold completely.
I mean, that being said, I mean, the Flintstones were...
they had a laugh track.
Well, no, the Flintstones were like 8 p.m. slot for years.
This is true.
They weren't. It was intended as like a family program, like a true family.
Yeah.
Like the whole family could sit
Right.
down and enjoy this thing. It wasn't
Yeah.
a
Of its
Saturday
time.
morning cartoon.
Exactly. So it was for adults and kids.
Yeah,
And Disney obviously was like that for a while. I think we're all trying to be like, when did animation become like so culturally predominant? Like, it's been there all along, where it's for kids, it's for adults, it's a serious medium to tell serious stories, whether it's Watership Down or
Right now it's
or even The
absolutely
Hobbit.
experimental.
When Rankin Bass did The Hobbit, like,
We'll do that.
I know that
You know
it's
what I want
it's
to do with The Hobbit, right?
it's crude, but I remember having read The Hobbit and then seeing the animation. I was like, wow, this is pretty close to the, that's pretty good. Like, I don't know, it worked for me.
And I think that might be the earliest where it was not adult, like totally adult, the way Bakshi can
Yeah,
be.
yeah.
Bakshi can be, but it felt not for children. And you've got things like Belladonna of Sadness, which is a Japanese film from the 70s, and it's very fairy tale like, but it's about a woman that's raped by a king, and it's trippy as fuck. It's so weird. And we finally figured out, me and a friend are going to watch it with Kill Bill, because it's like a whole revenge thing. And it's going to work real well.
Again, though, going back to Hunchback, a lot of their art form and their cultural art form stayed a style that was extremely similar to their anime style.
Yeah, like their woodblock print style, they were already doing more like, not cartoonized, but I guess it's the best way, like, they weren't seeking out realism in their art as much. So when animation,
Theater, yeah.
and so when animation came around, they were just taking their illustrated storytelling styles, which talked about all sorts of adult things, and going, okay, we put it over here now. Although a lot of anime comes, like the way anime characters look like is actually a weird hybrid between their traditional woodblock style and like Betty Boop. Because that's what they were getting. And if you look at Betty, when you see Betty Boop, it makes like totally weird sense.
I remember watching Speedracer before I'd go to school at like 6 a.m. and the monkey, and I'm like, this is so not fucking funny. And I was angry, but I could not watch it because it was so unlike anything else.
Yeah, it was bad.
And then the monkey would make some stupid joke and they would laugh at it, and I'd be like, he's not funny. Like, I was so incensed.
That was me
as a
with the
kid.
Roadrunner. I wanted the Roadrunner to die the most horrific
Hilarious.
death.
Yeah.
I wanted to
loved
snap
Wiley
its neck.
Coyote.
There's no fury like a kid who's like, this isn't funny.
Oh my god.
Stop
or Tom and
laughing.
Jerry, like when like,
Hated Tom and
oh
Jerry.
my god, when Jerry
Particularly hated Tom.
Oh, really? I hated Jerry. I hated the mouse.
Okay, so I have two questions. I like that because I was thinking about this one, and I always love this game. Which cartoon character do you like think you're most similar to or empathize with? And I'll say I definitely think I'm Daffy Duck. I'm like kind of the asshole, like that it stands on the outside a little bit. That there's always somebody a little more popular and likable, and I'm the one that's like. I always liked Daffy Duck as a kid. Like, I empathized with him a little too much and what he was trying to do, and it just fails, and you're like, oh, like, I see it, dude. I see it. And, like, later, so there's two incarnations of Daffy Duck. Not the earlier one when he's literally Daffy and zany and just kind of like a chaos demon. Like, the later stuff. The later stuff, like Duck Amuck. Like, oh, I feel for him in Duck Amuck so much. He's just trying to do his bit, and this asshole artist is just changing shit around and like.
You mean, I mean, besides Lisa Simpson?
I think every woman in the U.S. can say I'm a little bit Lisa Simpson.
Because to be honest, I was definitely, when I watched Scooby Doo, it was Daphne was the redhead. So,
Yeah,
right.
Velma was the nerd.
Velma was the nerd. Yeah, I always saw myself as Velma, but not like explicitly. Other than that, between Velma, I guess, and Lisa, I don't know. That's a tough one because I don't. I mean, aspirationally, what's her name in Aeon Flux? Like, totally.
Eon Flux, like the
That yes, that right, that is her name. Yeah, aspirationally, oh my god, she was like the coolest. Yeah, that would be my like aspirational self, but probably Velma.
I like that dichotomy because their hair is almost, you can sort of see this morph of like Velma's little short bob to like Eon Flux, and now I want to see the weird fan art version where you combine those two things.
Growing up, I was absolutely the closest to the genie. Like, because I was random and doing voices all the time and so weird. And outside of like the context of you understanding me as a person, I don't make sense in normal society. Definitely trying to do a lot of magical things. Absolutely just like, oh, you're going to do this? Well, I'm not going to do it normally. But as I grow up, I feel I've become more of my favorite cartoon, which is Darkwing Duck, where he kind of has his shit together, but like everything else in his world is like not. If only the rest of the world had the standards that like he just needs to survive by and do his job by, I feel more closely to Darkwing Duck than anything.
I will say also, like, the adult version would be more the brain than Pinky.
Yeah.
Where, like you were saying, like, I just want something to go right once and it never goes my way. You know, that kind of.
It's like, hey, Pinky, what do you know what we're going to do tonight, Pinky? I think I do, but where are we going to find pants big enough to fit a rhino? And you're like, what? No! I like your enthusiasm, but no!
Aidan?
That's a really, like, tricky one. I haven't actually thought about this ever. I would say sometimes I feel, and I hate this about myself, sometimes I feel like Sebastian from The Little Mermaid because he's just worried about every goddamn thing. He's just like, oh, should we do this? Oh, my name's Mr. Overthink. But then sometimes I feel like Tommy Pickles from Rugrats because I was the oldest child, and I don't even know if he's the oldest, is he?
Yeah, he is.
Yeah.
There's
and
Dylan
he just
and him.
had and he had this like sense of like duty that the other kids didn't really have, and he like had to deal with like Angelica being an asshole, but like he had to be the bigger one and not be like mean to her back, and like everyone else could lose their shit, but he couldn't. Like he was the one that's like, I don't even. I'm
Never
not gonna
look up, by the way, there are videos on the internet that talk about how
the theories are so creepy.
How sad Angelica's life is, and how sad Hilda from Hey Arnold's life is. If you actually examine like their scenario, just how sad those little girls' lives are. You're like, this should never have happened, because like Hilda's from a broken home. It seems like her mom's probably an alcoholic.
Yeah.
Like, of course she's like a bully and has a weird crush on a boy, and acts out in all these ways because her home life is shit.
Yeah.
And like Angelica's parents ignore her. Like, of course she's gonna be a mean kid. Like, she has nobody to pay attention to her. She's a weird, creepy doll. Cynthia? I think her name was Cynthia.
Yeah, that's right.
But like, I watched 2 videos on these girls and I was like, oh god, that's too dark. Yeah. So this is the sad part, and then we'll wrap it up. But I always like knowing what animated film like makes you cry, like the one you sort of remember, or if you're like me, you watch to cry, like you watch on repeat because you're like, I need this moment right now. And I credit both of these movies we watched because I cry at every movie now.
I cry all the time too.
Iron Giant, hands down. I cannot get through that movie without crying. Can't do it.
Oh my god, saddest movie of all time. I've only seen it once. I will never be able to watch it again. But Dumbo, the original.
Oh yeah.
Oh, just even thinking about it, it was
Opening.
when they take. I mean, it is our current immigration policy.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
It is soul destroying
Do we
to even
unplug
watch
anything?
it.
We're good. Just the tape.
But I would say that one of the saddest movies, bar none.
Tonally changes like a 180. When you watch it, it's so weird by the end.
I think you just.
pink elephant.
I think you're so desperate for. I think it's so sad when the child is taken from the mother and the reaction of the mother is so convincing that you're something right has to happen. I think whoever worked on that would be a really fascinating podcast, is to look, because they've been doing a lot of archiving of the Disney Studio early days now, really understanding, well, who exactly put together the haunted house, who did the early sketches, who signed off on them, who revised them, like all of that work, who did the original layouts for Dumbo, who came up with that particular moment, because I'm telling you, the guys who did it were just like, something has to fucking go right in this movie now. And they just figured out they came up with a bunch of things. And that...
And because it's not just the separation, they really build up to it by showing all these babies being given to their moms by the storks, and all the cuddling and love and excitement for babies, And then she gets her one like weird big-eared baby, So you've seen all the mothers.
How much she loves her baby. I mean, and then you bring to the movie a little understanding of elephants being special among animals, And I, even as a kid, it's not like I had a well-developed theory about that, but you know a little bit about your basic animal shapes. And That was an animal shape that was important, and just like the most devastating thing you could possibly imagine. Not just happens in a moment, like it is a sequence, and it is utterly devastating. I think whoever did that movie had a really deep understanding of
It's almost like it happened
loss.
to them.
Yeah, no shit.
You know?
Like it is so convincing, and then they just are like, oh my god, something has to go right in this movie, or we just can't deal with it. You know, and that was the movie.
Back away from their own emotions.
Yeah, I think so. I do.
Because,
That's why
like,
it's so
Hocus
weird.
is so weird.
It's just a bunch of weird
freaking
things
correct.
that are like, you know, that just happen.
And it happened, and the resolution in that happens so quickly. It's like he can fly, and then it's like boom on a train going off into the sunrise. Bye, done movie. Like, and you're like, wait, what? He falls asleep drunk. He's in the tree. He's like, how'd I get up here? The crows are like, you flew up here. And then it's like, yeah, you can totally fly, dude. He goes back to the circus. Flies.
Sounds like my Saturday night. How'd I get up here? You flew up there. Oh.
Knew it.
Yeah.
And then he flies at the circus, and it's like everybody loves him. Mom's out of prison. Done. Like, movie ends.
Mom's out of
Like, nowadays you would have a sequence where, like, he saved a kid or something, you know, like some real resolution.
Right.
But instead he's like a money maker, so his mom can come out of prison.
Yeah, that's she's a little bit treated like Oprah Winfrey is in The Color Purple. She's
Kill him, Dave.
That would actually be interesting to watch Dumbo in The Color Purple.
Oh my god.
Did you give yours?
No, that's what I was gonna say.
Not to be that like asshole who like doesn't answer the question. I'm like not trying to be different. It's just hard for me to, because I'm like you, Mel, where you just cried everything. But there are certain specific moments in animated films that I will just watch that one scene because I think that even if the movie itself is not that great, like I mentioned Tarzan, for example, like that movie is far from perfect. I mean, it's entertaining, and don't get me wrong, but it's like there's one moment when Tarzan and Jane first meet, and it's that moment where they touch hands and Tarzan finally like sees someone like him. And it was the slowness of that scene that really grasped me, like the slow music, the pulling off of the glove gently, and like for the first time, this man who's been like having to really fight and prove himself for the first time is just like taking a moment to like touch hands with his own humanity. Like it was just this very simple scene that I really like. There's also, even in like, clearly I'm a kid of the 90s Disney, but like even in Beauty and the Beast, the famous ballroom scene, sometimes like I sit there and cry because it really shifted. Like not only technologically was amazing, but like, I don't know, I think of stuff now and I'm like, when like that movie kind of just celebrate like something as simple as just like a ballroom dance was a spectacle and was something that people like talked about after the movie, and it was such a simple idea, but to me it represented so much. But it was just this simple dance that happened, and it's like, I don't know, I really like those simpler moments, even if the movie itself is like, you know, well, can be zany and crazy. But
No, that's a good answer. I
Or
think that's
anything in
an
Toy
answer
Story.
to the first and second part of the question. I don't think Rekha and I answered the second part of the question.
Did you answer? What'd you say?
I
Jane?
just said to do that, like the.
you didn't delve into your answer, you just said it.
Just said Iron Man.
Oh, Iron Giant.
yeah.
Yeah. Oh.
Is it like the deer scene, or is it when he thinks he's Superman?
It's when he thinks he's Superman, or what?
when
I
he
don't think.
decides to identify.
Yeah, he identifies as Superman. I think that's really big. That's a good one. And then also, it's either that for me or and it's important that I state for anyone who doesn't know this movie even exists, DuckTales Treasure of the Lost Lamp came out before Aladdin in 1990. And the reason I say this is important is because the movie Aladdin basically stole the ending of DuckTales, where I was a huge DuckTales fan. And
That's a big deal.
Yeah, and I think the revival is actually stellar. So for me, the lost lamp, this moment at the end where Scrooge McDuck, you know, he on the surface level, you think Scrooge McDuck is greed, but it's really always more about achievement with Scrooge McDuck. But in the movie Tales of the Lost Lamp, he faces like a cartoon of a cartoon villain who wants the lamp for wishes and ultimate wealth and greed, etc., which is what you think Scrooge McDuck might be. Yes, sitting on his Smaug level type of pile of money, absolutely. He literally swims in this. But again, it's just a mirror. It's his achievement. It's when he gets the lamp, he gives these, you know, he's got 3 wishes, and the second wish is return Duckburg back to where it was after the villain put the infinite wish amulet on the lamp. And then he's just like, I've had enough of the wishing, I wish for this genie to be free. Before Aladdin did it. It was before Aladdin. And so if you watch DuckTales and you're a kid, you think Scrooge McDuck is greedy. You think that's what that is. As you get older, you're like, it's more achievement. But this is a man who's like, I could have literally I could have the achievement on the surface level of being greedy things like, nah, I'm going to take this away from everybody, even myself. Like, that's, as a character development, that's huge. That's really huge. And when I think of, like, deeper things that, like, I watch where I'm like, I want to feel good about myself if I did something terrible, or, like, maybe I misunderstood something.
And Aladdin did it out of a sense of, like, friendship and, like, his sense of goodness. Scrooge was doing it as, like, more like, this is good for everybody else.
Yeah. Because when he does it, though, they animate his face to feel bad, like he's another nephew. Because he's seeing this. He's the same age as Huey, Dewey, and Louie and Webby. Yeah, he's the same age, and he kind of looks at him like a kid. Because they trick him for a while. They think this is another friend of ours.
Yeah, they dress him up.
So he can't. So he's like, he gets in this mindset of like, oh well, once he finds out he's the genie, he's like, well, I'm gonna make these wishes now. And he's like, not only can I not treat another person like this, no one should treat a person like this, and no one should have this power. So goodbye to those wishes. And I thought that was really sweet. I love that moment.
Yeah, I know I'm gonna watch that one. I think with Indiana Jones.
Yep.
I forgot who wrote that one down. We're also trying to find one for the Chipmunks movie, which I'm not excited for. I do not think it will hold up. He's just keep leaning into the microphone over there, like.
I like the way it smells.
Okay, like what's going on over there? So I'm gonna say thank you all, and we're gonna close this out. And thank you all, and thank you to Mr. My cat, who did not make too much noise.
He was a good boy.
He's my Halloween cat. Have a good time, and we'll do this again.